Welcome to Recogs, the show where we learn how the world's best business operators build consumer brands from sourcing to selling. Brought to you by Manufactured. Manufactured is an online platform that helps brands manufacture, finance, and distribute inventory across 20 industries in 25 countries. If you're interested in learning more, check out manufactured.com. Our guest today is Jody Polishchuk, CEO of Sundays. Sundays is reinventing the Oreo with 0 sugar and 1 gram of net carbs. We discuss his aha moment that led to starting Sundays, what owning your entire supply chain actually means, why they're purely focused on D2C currently, and much, much, much more. Without further ado, here's Jody. Jody, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you?
Mike, it's great to be here, man. It's awesome to put a face to the LinkedIn circle. Thank you for having me on. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fun chat. So want to talk from like the early days. I know that you're a serial entrepreneur. You've done a bunch of things in the CPG space, but what was the insight or aha moment that led you to founding Sundays?
I can tell you exactly what it was. I remember almost the exact moment. I was sitting on my couch. This was like, I was, kind of intuitively understood that my current business at the time was going to be wound down over the next few months, and Magic Spoon had just launched. So they launched in, I want to say it was like April 2019, if I'm not mistaken, like spring 2019 is when they launched. And so this was now several months later, and texting with a buddy who knew them and just had, his finger on the pulse of the business and just told me what they were doing in revenue. And I just remember thinking in that moment, someone has got to do this for an Oreo. That was it. As an entrepreneur, and I think any other entrepreneur is going to resonate with what I'm about to say. It's like we have lots of ideas, right? And most of them aren't very good. And even the ones that are good, this is a subtle distinction. Even the ones that are like, you're like, yeah, this is actually a good idea, but it might not make a good business, right? A lot of cool ideas just aren't great businesses. And so I think every founder can relate to those. Susie Batiste, who's the founder of Poopery. You know that brand?
Yeah.
So she has this term of alive ideas, which I really love, which are like ideas that they have a life of their own and they just get hooked their teeth in you and they never really let you go, right? And those are the ones that want to get brought to life. And so that's kind of what this was.
Once you figured out that you wanted to make a healthier version of the Oreo, obviously compete with Oreo, how did you approach the formulation and recipe for Sundays?
So having had experience in the industry, I knew that if I went to a product development firm, it was just going to be really, really expensive. And so, my wife and I self-funded this for a while, up until it got to the point to where it was, it was sort of it made sense to go and raise capital. And so, I wanted to validate that it was possible. And so that meant to me just taking a more measured approach. So I reached out to a developer on LinkedIn, cold, had no relationship with this person at all, who was the current head of R&D for a very similar company. I'll just leave it at that. And she took this on sort of evenings and weekends. And that's how we started. It was hourly work, still very expensive. I mean, anyone who's done product development knows it's expensive. I mean, it's minimum $150 to $200 an hour. So, and we just started, and it was a year of bench work. You know what bench work is? Bench work is when you're basically just working at a very small scale to get to validate the formula until a point at which it's ready for a trial. So it was a year of bench work. We now have there is now a sort of BFY sandwich cream set, right? Us, High Key, Leo's, which is a Rip Van brand, Catalina Crunch. There's a small handful of them. At the time, there was nothing. None of those brands or none of those lines existed at the time. So there was, typically, unless you're doing something really innovative, which this is, you have a development roadmap, right? You can look at another product and say, this is what they did, and how do we make it better, right? Or how do we make it our own? We didn't have that. Nothing existed. So, and sandwich creams are a very technically challenging product to make. So the beginning was literally like, what are we even making these with? Because I really wanted that like gold standard of macros for the low carb community. And to me, that was 1 gram of net carbs per serving, which is really difficult to do and have it taste good. Really, really hard to do. And furthermore, and this is something that I'm incredibly proud of, is we don't use any inulin in our product at all. Zero. You will be hard pressed to find a single, very low carb product that doesn't use inulin at all. And the narrative in the consumer sort of landscape around inulin is changing quite a bit now, where, I think the consumer is connecting inulin and short chain fibers to their intestinal discomfort that they have, which is a common experience among low carb products, where you can only eat a few and then it's like, I better stop, right? So we didn't want that because we didn't want to limit consumption at that single serving, like, occasion, right? So that was kind of a long-winded answer to the question. It was a journey, but that was the beginning of it. Was just reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn and just starting small.
I understand how complex this product could be, or at least vaguely have like an understanding of an idea. Like one net carb for a snack is super difficult to do, and especially for this types of product. But how did you know in like the trial experience? Like, talk to me a little bit of how you thought about trial, how you thought about where you actually had the right product for formulation for it. How did you kind of like validate that you had like the right recipe for sundaes, and then as well as how did you find your manufacturing partner?
Yeah, great question. So we found the manufacturing partner first. This was concurrently. So we started the bench work. We were already on our way in that regard. Found a manufacturing partner, not our current manufacturing partner, but found one. And we, each large scale manufacturers have R&D teams internally, usually, right? They have some sort of R&D department. And so we sent them the formula. They recreated the formula on their bench. And then their head of R&D, who knows, everything about this process, basically was like, okay, I think we're ready for a trial.
Got it. So then their R&D was comfortable enough to say, okay, we've got the right product. How did you then go about trialing?
We scheduled the trial. So the plant was in LA, actually. So I was going down there every few months for like most of 2020. So we just started. I mean, there's only one way to know if your product is going to work being manufactured at scale, and that is to test it at scale. And that is a painful process because it never works right away. And it's expensive. I mean, dude, these trials were like $15K a pop. And we ended up having to do, multiple ones. I think we did like 5 in total in order to get this over the line. And so, it's just an iterative process. It's like you do the trial and either it works or it doesn't work. And regardless, you look at like, okay, if it didn't work, what do we have to change to get it to work? If it did work, great, it worked, but are you happy with the finished product? Which the answer to that question was no, over and over again. And then, it's a very tedious journey because, you go back to the bench and then you make those iterations internally with your R&D team. Then you send the formula back to the co-packer, then they validate it again. Then you schedule the trial. That doesn't happen the next week. That's like happens 4 to 6 weeks out. You have to order more ingredients. So that's why this process typically takes, it can take a few years. I'm not saying it always does, but it certainly can. It's not unusual to have a 2-year R&D journey from start to finish.
What was the hardest ingredient to source on like or the hardest part about creating the product apart from in terms of finding like the right recipe for it?
The hardest part was just getting it to a place to where I was happy with it. which there was no, like, we have a really clean label, which I'm super proud of. So we don't have any exotic ingredients. I think, during, have to keep in mind, like, we developed this over the pandemic, right? So, like, that just happened. And um, so there were certain things that were quite tight, like cocoa powder was tight, allulose was tight, but we don't have any like exotic ingredients. I mean, the beginning of the war in Ukraine, which now seems like so long ago, really affected the price of sunflower lecithin. Like, who knew that like all this commercial sunflower is grown in the Ukraine?
Wow.
I do now, and so it like 10x'd. But like there wasn't anything where we like couldn't get it. I mean, all of our ingredients are domestic, knock on wood. So we're not dealing with like those horror stories you're hearing about like containers from China. Like, we don't deal with any of that stuff.
Once you had the right product and you were happy with it, with over all of this long process of trialing and until you were right, how did you think overall about which sales channel you wanted to head into first?
Well, I kind of always, at this stage of the business, first question I ask myself is, it's basically the same question, but they're two questions that are two sides of the same coin. Is this going to drive immediate ROI? And is this a capital efficient sales channel? Just in the sense of just like, cash flow is king and stretching our dollars. And so, we started with just our website, Shopify, direct to consumer site, which we still have. Um, and we quickly launched on Amazon as well. Um, we've tested retail. We never were planning on going into retail right away. We had an opportunity to go into Foxtrot and we took that. And so that's kind of like, looking at that as like basically a test for retail. And with the idea that like, Foxtrot is an amazing retailer for one. They're a fantastic partner. They're not a high velocity retailer. It's not where people go to buy their groceries, right? So, you know, the bar there is such that if we can perform well in Foxtrot, well, then what are we going to do in actual grocery, right? So that's kind of just like creating a data story for us to bring to other retailers. But yeah, we're really just focusing on laser focus on direct to consumer and Amazon right now.
On the D2C side, how are you thinking overall? Because D2C is really tough to make work for CPG products, just because they're typically obviously they're consumables or they're a lower cost, and you kind of need bigger basket sizes in order for the economics work. How do you think about the overall the D2C channel? Obviously it's like the least expensive, or the easiest to head into. Anyone can order can open up a D2C shop. But how are you thinking about it from a channel's perspective?
We're super bullish on it. And the reason why is because we have really like unusually strong gross margins on this business, which makes the unit economics more palatable. Um, and so right now we have a pretty low AOV. And the reason why is just really simple. We only have one SKU. We launched just with the classic, right? Which is like, there's not many products you can get away with launching just with one SKU, and this is one of them. Um, and so the easiest lever to pull is AOV, right? So, for us, it's been this process of and testing creative and messaging and just really finding those ad sets that are performing and that are going to allow us to acquire customers at scale, either profitably or at break even on first purchase. Like, I'm adamant that we're not lighting a bunch of money on fire to grow top line on this business. Um, and so concurrently to that, we have three new SKUs launching later this summer. We got mint, double chocolate, and double stuff. And so those three will bundle with the classic. And that will most certainly increase our AOV. We're estimating it's gonna go up to 50 from 40 right now. And we should be pretty close to first purchase break even, if not there, when that happens.
That's awesome that your business can perform well on D2C in terms of that it's just such high margins there. Because many businesses aren't as high margin, which is why D2C hasn't really worked out well, or just the basket sizes are just way too small for it to work. Um, but when you're thinking about launching new SKUs from an ops perspective, like I've had on some founders where when they have to launch a SKU, it's like building out an entire new supply chain that they have to do, and they have to figure it out. How complex is that? Obviously, it's complex when it comes to getting the right flavor and going through that entire process to making sure it tastes good and kind of all the different attributes that you want. But once you've actually developed that product, how much of a toll is that on your current supply chain to actually tweak it to a new SKU?
Not at all. Like this product in particular is uniquely suited to extremely flexible flavor innovation. So for example, the mint, the only thing you're changing is the cream, right? And you're only adding color and flavor, right? Dude, the double stuff, our R&D cost on the double stuff was $0. And it's like a huge Oreo fan favorite. All you do, you literally just turning the nozzle at the plant, like more cream, right? We just need a new package. So we have with these three new SKUs that we just introduced combined, I think I'll tell you right now, we have four new ingredients, four new inputs with three SKUs. So it's extremely streamlined.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And they're like, and their colors and flavors that we're ordering in like tiny quantities.
When you're launching new SKUs, how do you think about the balance in terms of how to order from like the main product, the original, versus like the new ones that you're going to be producing?
So we own our entire supply chain. So part of the reason, I mean, I would say the main reason that we have such healthy margins is our co-packer isn't tacking on 20% onto our ingredients, right? So we own our entire supply chain. We're very much a just-in-time organization. And when I say just-in-time, I'm talking about like we're running on Friday, the stuff's landing at the plant on Wednesday, right? So I think this is the answer to your question. Like we typically, here's the other thing too, is that, I'm not going to disclose where we manufacture, but our entire supply chain, with the exception of one ingredient, which I'm not going to say what it is within 100 miles of our plant.
That's really useful.
So we have for example, like our allulose, same day transit. Our whey protein, same day transit. All that stuff. So we're really truly ordering last minute.
Can you talk to me about what that actually means and when it comes to order like that you actually own your entire supply chain? Because are you using co-manufacturers or do you actually have like your own factory?
Yeah, but so a lot of brands are full turnkey, or I mean, a lot of contracts are full turnkey where it's like you're just paying for the finished good, right? So you're paying X amount of money for the box of cookies and you don't have to deal with anything else, right? So we are the customer for our suppliers. Whereas like with the former, the co-man is the customer, right? We're the customer. So we have direct relationships with our entire supply chain. There's a few outliers there, like like for example, we don't buy xanthan gum, right? Like we don't need to do that. We don't buy salt. Our co-man supplies that. But for every other like meaningful ingredient, we purchase those. And we have those direct relationships with the suppliers. And so, when we pay our co-man, we're paying for tolling only. So, which is the labor involved, right?
So you're the ones that are actually managing the relationship with like who's sourcing the raw ingredients, stuff like that, and you're not getting charged like an additional cost for a manufacturing facility to actually kind of orchestrate that entire process.
Correct. It's like when you have a full turnkey contract, like your co-man is marking up every one of your ingredients, right? So there's a cost, there's a price of admission when you're managing your own supply chain, which is that you have to for one, you have to source everything, you have to develop all of these relationships, and it's a little more friction, but I mean it's well worth it.
How do you think about on the inventory side and financing the inventory? Are you typically using mostly debt in this current climate, or cash?
We use cash, but also like we have a pretty healthy. You know what? We have a decently strong cash conversion cycle. We haven't really started to step on the gas on paid social yet, which is kind of what's required in order to really unlock that. But again, like we have really strong growth margins on this business, and so our gross margins are funding a lot of the business. We're certainly not profitable. I don't want to say that. But yeah, we are using cash. We have leaned into a small amount of debt equity, but not much. And the debt equity, we did not pursue that. I literally opened Shopify one day, and they're like, "You qualify for a Shopify capital thing." Yeah, it was like there, and I like looked at it and what they were offering and what we had to pay for it. I mean, you know what? I don't know what the APR, and I can just tell you right now what it was because it's not confidential or anything. It was 14 grand is what they offered. And we didn't need the money at that point. Let me be clear about that. But like it was 14 grand. And then I was like looking at what we had to pay, and it was $1,500 for $14,000 of like liquidity. And it was like, and there's no timeline. They just take it out of your payments.
Yeah, it's revenue based financing, right?
It's revenue based, yeah. So, I don't know what the APR on it is. I'm sure it's, it depends on how fast you pay it off. But like, well, the way that I look at it is like $1,500. Like, who cares, right? For 14 grand of like liquidity, and it was just there, and I pressed a button, and it was in our bank account in 2 days. So yeah, we did that. That's the only one that we've done.
Got it. Okay. When you kind of have free working capital, since you have great margins, how do you put that to work in terms of investing in growth? Does that go directly to marketing and paid ads?
Yeah, exactly. And we haven't even come close to scaling our paid spend. The most that we've spent in any one day so far is like in the $600 to $700 range. And so we're just testing right now. So, we're about 2 quarters in now, and it's been a period of one rapid product improvement. I didn't want to derail the conversation, but to something you said before, the product that we launched with is not what we have now, which is pretty common, right? So we got to that like V1 consumer facing, started to get feedback, iterated the product. So we've already gone through that process, and then concurrently sort of just establishing paid social baselines, metrics, etc., and optimizing those in preparation of scaling the business, with the goal being, profitable or break even first purchase customer acquisition. So, but to answer your question, yeah, it's just basically all going into that. It goes into more than one bucket, but because we're not yet profitably acquiring customers online, we're not far, but we're not there yet. So yeah, so it's funding that.
Besides Foxtrot, you aren't, in a national chain of grocery and what have you. But if a retailer comes to you and says, "Hey, we want to," and I don't know if this has happened already, but if a retailer has come to you and said, "Hey, we want you in our stores," blah blah blah, how do you assess if you actually want to pursue that wholesale channel?
That's a good question. So it actually recently happened for the first time, where we had somebody who was close to one of the ShopRite banners. So like, ShopRite, they're all family-owned banners, right? So it's like one family will own like 30 ShopRites. So, and they're good stores. We've done business with ShopRite before in previous business that I had. And so they were like, "Hey, we can get you." And this is like, and I'm going to say the name of it, but it's the best ShopRite chain. Or the best ShopRite group. There's like 30 of them. And so this was just last week. And, I think the answer to almost any of those, there's not a lot of evaluation right now, because the answer is no, because it's not aligned with our strategy. It's the shiny object, right? They're like, "Hey, we'll get you into ShopRite." Like, it's a no-brainer. And so it really, for me, I'm really working on cultivating a very disciplined approach when it comes to like sticking with where we're trying to go. So to answer your question, there's not a lot of evaluation right now.
Because you're solely focused on D2C and Amazon and making sure that those levels are at a good spot in order for you revenue wise before you actually go and you actually take on like a new channel.
Correct. And so to give you a better answer, the evaluation would be what is the projected ROI when, and not what, when, because it's never immediate, and what is the cost of entering this channel and how capital efficient is it, right? Like, what are the margins the retailer wants? What are the margins the distributor wants? What type of consumer shops there? Although now it's like, I mean, the line between natural and organic and conventional is very blurred right now, right? Like very blurred. So everybody kind of shops everywhere right now. And, it's just like geographically, is this where we want to be? Just really taking a very detail-oriented approach, and would be deciding on where to go. I mean, distributors for us are a big thing. Like we, there's the big two, obviously, UNFI and KeHE, and like we're pushing those relationships out for as long as possible because they are not designed for brands of our size to win, right? Like we are transactional relationships to those distributors. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but like they could give a shit about it, companies of our size, right? They just chew them up and spit them out. And so, yeah, kind of looking at it through that lens, and going direct is going to be a big thing for us. And that just is another way of saying a capital efficient retailer. So that's why like looking at like Target, and Club is when we go. That's will be where we're looking.
What would you value more? $100 of inventory, so $100 of COGS, or $100 cash?
I mean, the real answer is so. The overly simplistic answer is the COGS because it's worth more than $100 once we sell it. I mean, but the real answer is that depends on our bank account balance.
That's fair.
Because it costs money to sell. It costs money to turn that $100 of COGS into more money.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
It depends. But on the surface, I'll take the COGS all day long. What would you take?
I would take $100 COGS if you can sell it. But as you say, like even, but if you can sell it, then I would take the $100 COGS if you have any type of margin, right? Because that COGS is going to be worth more than $100 cash. But if you bank into marketing expenses and all that stuff like that, as long as your kind of contribution margin, I'd imagine, is positive, still I would take the $100 of inventory over the $100 cash.
Almost all day.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless we really need the $100 in which case we got way bigger problems.
Yes, exactly. I mean, really, right. It really depends too. If the demand is not there, obviously $100 cash and not the inventory.
Yeah, I think we're aligned on that.
Cool. Well, Jody, thank you so much for your time. This has been a lot of fun.
Mike, this has been great. Let's do this again, man. Really fun. I appreciate you inviting me on, and I'm down to chat anytime.
And there you have it. Jody, thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. Thank you as well to Manufactured. Manufactured is an online platform that helps brands manufacture, finance, and distribute inventory across 20 industries in 25 countries. If you want to learn more, check out manufactured.com.